So today we're going to be talking about Ty West's entire X trilogy. That's going to include X, Pearl, and MaXXXine, all starring Mia Goth. Timestamps are in the description below. How we're going to do this is I'm going to be talking about each individual movie, giving a spoiler-free review, scoring them, and at the end of the video, I'm going to be giving an overall ranking from the very worst to the very best. Also, I'll be giving a similar recommendation to each of these movies, just in case if there's something you want to add to your watch list that you may have never seen before. Alright, so let's get started with X 2022, directed and written by Ty West, starring Mia Goth, and a whole bunch of other people. I think the coolest thing about this trilogy is how each individual film pays homage to a certain era of cinema. This movie is clearly a love letter to 70s grindhouse cinema, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Black Christmas, Halloween. But even prior to the 70s, there are shots and sequences and story beats that are clearly inspired by Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. From the way that this movie is shot alone, it looks like it's shot on 16mm film, but it's shot completely all in digital. I don't even know if X has a 4K release yet, but the Blu-ray, I just rewatched this, does this shit beautifully. It came out 2022, yet it looked like it was straight ripped from the 70s. But let's dig a bit deeper. Is there anything more that X provides to us besides the aesthetic and clearly paying homage to classic horror cinema? Yes, this movie is a great standalone horror slasher that I would recommend to probably everybody. Everybody, if you could stomach violence and gore, because this movie, the second half of it, gets very bloody and it is very brutal, over the top. It's fun if you can handle blood. What I really like about horror movies, because so little are able to accomplish this, is in between the terrifying moments, are you having a good movie? Are we still entertained or are we bored? Just waiting for something interesting to happen. But this movie keeps you engaged from start to finish, even regardless of the terrifying moments, because the actors, not only do they do a great job, but they play such a fun, likable cast of characters. They're having conversations about love, pornography, relationships, art, and it's not philosophical. We're not watching Hunger by Steve McQueen, but they're funny, the dialogue is intriguing, you like hearing these back and forths. These characters are lively, they have a personality. A lot of horror movies, at least nowadays, have lacked that. I've seen plenty of horror movies where the characters are literally so dog shit you're just waiting for them to get got. Like, leave the screen. Can someone kill him? And of course the actors are Jenna Ortega, she kills it. We got Kid Cudi doing a great job. Stephen as the old creepy man. Mia Goth plays the older woman in incredible makeup. The makeup and costume design in this movie is outstanding. Arden Henderson as Wayne Gilroy, probably my favorite character in the movie. We got Brittany Snow as Bobby Lynn, who I love Brittany Snow. Her magnum opus, Pitch Perfect, but she was great in this movie too. We spend the first hour with these characters on the ranch trying to set up for the adult film. And there are little moments, little creepy editing sequences throughout that just keeps that tension there. Like, hey, you're having fun watching these characters, but keep in mind you're in a horror movie and there's this atmosphere building around, like, you know some shit is gonna go down. And then when shit hits the fan, shit hits the fan. The violence in this movie, again, like I said, grindhouse cinema goes all out. It's not like the Terrifier where the gore is so over the top it almost feels sadistic. This one definitely doesn't feel mean-spirited. It keeps that over the top to the point where it balances the line between fun craziness and I'm watching torture porn. Besides the aesthetics, the movie is just well shot in general, the cinematography. There's one really beautiful scene, which I won't spoil, but it involves a lot of red, the use of red. At night. So yeah, the kills were awesome. This movie is nothing groundbreaking, but it is a fun revitalization of a genre that hasn't been dealt a good hand in recent years. I'm giving X a 6 out of 10 and I would recommend it. And for my similar recommendation to X, I'm going to be going with the 1974 horror classic Black Christmas, directed by Bob Clark. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say this. This is top 3 scariest movies I've ever seen. This movie follows a killer stalking a sorority house, one by one, picking them off, and it is so effective in its scares. This is not necessarily X where you're having a fun time. This movie is trying to terrify you. The score is haunting, but I think my favorite part about this movie is the sound design. They knew exactly when and when not to use the score. There are moments in this movie where there's like no sound and you're just in the moment and it just adds to that intensity. Now this movie is technically a slasher, but I would say it plays more in its giallo roots in the sense of you don't know who the killer is. That's a big draw in this movie. It's a murder mystery whodunit. And as the movie gets on, it just gets creepier and more intense. You care about all the characters. They're all so fantastic and funny and lively. The deaths are absolutely insane. The deaths, while not being over the top, they're just very disturbing. And the ending of Black Christmas, I would say, is still one of the most effective, creepy endings I've ever seen in a horror movie. I don't want to say too much, but amazing cast, shot beautifully, great sound design, great soundtrack. Black Christmas is one of the best horror movies of all time, and it is a big staple in horror cinema, especially the slasher genre. If you like X, watch Black Christmas. So for the sequel, or should I say the prequel in the X trilogy, we got Pearl 2022, directed by Ty West, written by Ty West, but also Mia Goth, who is of course the lead actress in this movie as well. So if you recall at the beginning of the video, I said each individual movie pays homage to a specific era of cinema. Pearl does not go for 70s grindhouse. Pearl goes for the Technicolor era of film, which would be The Wizard of Oz, the 1930s. The score, the cinematography, everything is definitely that era. The style of filmmaking is not only different from Pearl to X, but also the genre of horror that they're going for. Where X went for a more 70s slasher horror, Pearl's going for a dark, psychological character study type of horror. So in this prequel, we follow a younger version of Pearl, who's the older lady from X, and we get to see her as a young woman in the 1910s, early 1920s, aspiring to chase her dreams. She wants to become an actress, she wants to be famous, she wants to be a dancer. Definitely Wizard of Oz vibes, definitely Dorothy, I want to go explore, see what the world is. That is definitely Pearl because her parents are extremely controlling. I say parents, but really just her mother, because the dad is a vegetable. He's paralyzed, he can't do shit, they gotta bathe him, they gotta feed him. The mom is extremely controlling, extremely strict, very emotional and mentally abusive, and at some scenes, physically. It's a very claustrophobic, isolated household, very toxic. The mother is clearly unhappy and depressed. So we're getting a nice look, we're getting a detailed look onto why Pearl may be the way she is, because from the start of this movie, it shows you Pearl is just not a good person. She's clearly unstable, but she's also a bad person. This is not Joker where you get an unstable person from the start and then bad shit just keeps happening to them and then they become evil. No, Pearl's a genuine psychopath from the beginning. And throughout the movie, she just gets worse and worse. You really see how unhinged and sexually frustrated she is. Very reminiscent of movies like American Psycho. Especially in both the movies, because you see some genuinely disturbing, unnerving moments, but it could also be viewed as a sort of dark comedy, and that is because, just like American Psycho, the lead performances elevate the writing material to a whole different level. Easily, this is Mia Goth's best performance. I loved her in this movie so much. She's the strongest point in this movie. Character writing has been more focused in Pearl rather than in X. We're getting a more detailed look into the family dynamics, into abuse, into family trauma. Now, while the character writing of Pearl is more detailed and focused and honed in on, I would say that the story itself isn't as engaging as X was. Not to say that this movie is poorly paced, because it's not, but X and Pearl have two different ways of telling its story, telling its horror. I just gravitated towards X a bit more. They are two pretty different movies, but within the same universe, I really like how they complement each other. Now, I will say I had more fun with X, but Pearl definitely has some aspects that are a bit stronger. I'm giving Pearl a 6 out of 10. I would also recommend this movie. And for my similar recommendation to Pearl, I'm going to be going with Saint Maud, another A24 movie from 2019, the feature debut of Rose Glass. So this is also a psychological horror character study about an insane woman, but I would say Saint Maud is actually pretty scary. So the story follows Maud, a young nurse who is put in charge of taking care of this retired dancer named Amanda, who has been diagnosed with cancer. Maud, recently devoting herself to Christianity, is devoted on saving Amanda's soul from eternal damnation. And I'll leave it at that. This movie is not only wonderfully shot and wonderfully acted by Morpheed Clark, Jennifer L. Apologies if I mispronounce those names. They are so good in this movie. It's beautifully shot. This is a slow burn movie that dances between the line of reality and what's not, and it is very good at just setting that tone and that dread, because the atmosphere in this movie is so eerie. Is she really experiencing these things? Is she just unhinged? What's going on? And that slow build of that dread just creeps in, and then there's some legitimate scary moments that happen in this movie. The ending of this movie is insane, especially the last shot. The last shot of this movie is one of those endings that'll just stick with you. Like, you'll just remember that forever. Definitely one of the more underrated A24 movies, especially if you're a fan of Hereditary and The Lighthouse, Get Out. This is a great psychological horror movie that you should check out. So for the final installment of Ty West's X trilogy, we got MaXXXine that came out this year, 2024, starring Mia Goth. Not a whole lot to say about this movie. Easily my least favorite of the franchise. Very boring, convoluted movie for the sake of trying to be a convoluted giallo film. This movie is clearly inspired by the Mario Bavas, the Dario Argentos, the Brian De Palmas, but it doesn't capture the soul and magic that those movies did from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So a giallo and a slasher are extremely similar, but they have a few distinctive differences. One, the Giallos came first. Giallos are horror movies that follow an unidentified killer picking off people one by one, and it usually involves a convoluted plot. Maybe characters have different motivations on why or why not they could be the killer. Have you ever seen a Scooby-Doo episode? That is literally a Giallo film, where you have a bunch of characters in one location, there's one person terrorizing the entire location, and the gang is trying to figure out who's doing it and why. A few other aspects of a Giallo film is the style of it. The neon lights, usually bright reds, bright greens, bright purples. The graphic violence, the blood, the slit throats, the beheadings. The first big Giallo film would probably be Mario Bava's Blood and Black Lace, I believe 1963, 1964. And unlike a slasher where the main draw is just a murderer trying to kill you, this movie is trying to figure out who's doing it. Literally a Scooby-Doo episode. Kind of a mix of a neo-noir, which MaXXXine did go for, but it just, the story and the mystery of MaXXXine is just so uninteresting and boring. Since the story itself feels a bit lackluster, when it takes its twists and turns and gets more convoluted, you kind of just stop engaging with it and it just gets messier and messier. So as the movie goes on, instead of being drawn in, you're drawn out. You're like, okay, I'm not like, what are we doing here? This is easily the worst cast of characters in the trilogy. MaXXXine sucks in this movie. Mia Goth is good as her. This is probably my least favorite performance in the trilogy from her, but she doesn't do bad. But she's really given nothing to do in this movie. In X, she was interesting. In Pearl, she killed it as Pearl, but in this movie, MaXXXine just felt so one-dimensional, bland. From the hype that Pearl got, it seemed like the writers were trying to make MaXXXine also iconic, but in a different way, and it just kind of fell on its face. MaXXXine is just so uninteresting in this movie. You don't really give a shit about her motivations or her story. The only memorable character was Kevin Bacon's character. He was the coolest character in this movie. And he also has the best scene. I won't spoil it, but it's a scene involving a car. That's a good scene. But besides the aesthetic, because again, like the other two movies, this movie is wonderfully shot. It does capture that giallo style with the colors. You even got shots of the fucking black leather glove. But besides that, this movie doesn't have a whole lot of its own soul and personality. And I can say X and Pearl did. This movie just felt, let's take a bunch of ideas from these classic B-horror giallo films and try to make a classic here. But the writing is just so weak in this movie. Yes, we like Mario Bava, we like Dario Argento, we like Brian De Palma. We've seen Dressed to Kill, but can you make an interesting story? The ending was kind of dumb. It felt over the top just for the sake of being over the top, try to capture that B-movie horror magic. The lead up to that climax was not worth it, and the climax itself was just, can we wrap this up? And I like the first two movies, so this was a pretty big letdown. It's not a horrible movie, but it's also not a good one. I'm giving MaXXXine a 4 out of 10, and I really wouldn't recommend it. Unless you've seen the first two movies and you just want to see how everything wraps up, then sure, but you're going to be left disappointed. So for the similar recommendation, I'll be going with A Bay of Blood, 1970, directed by Mario Bava. This movie was such a clearly big inspiration on the 70s horror, the 80s horror too, that we got. Friday the 13th especially. So it takes place on a lake and we have all these different characters, and in the setup we're learning about them, their characteristics, what their personalities are, what their possible motivations are going to be, because murders eventually do start happening left and right. And this movie for 1970 got pretty violent. The deaths are more brutal, the stabbings are more visceral. The mystery in Blood and Black Lace I would say is better, but I just found myself a bit more entertained with The Bay of Blood. I just found this movie to be more of a roller coaster ride. The ending, oh my god, A Bay of Blood's ending has got to be the craziest shit you'll ever see. If you don't know the ending of Bay of Blood, you gotta watch the movie from beginning to end. It's on Shudder right now, and the ending alone is just worth it. It's one of those endings where it's not even a plot twist, but you still don't see it coming, because it's, I don't even know how to describe it. It just happens left field. Oh my god, I started laughing when I saw that. It was just, that's some cinema right there. But obviously, if you're a fan of MaXXXine, you should check out all the classic giallo films. You gotta check out Dario Argento, Lucio Fulci, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Obviously, Mario Bava's, the rest of his catalog. Brian De Palma got a few hits too. But yeah, it's really cool just to see this genre inspire basically what just ran America's horror cinema for decades and decades. And it's a fun time too, so check it out when you can. So X and Pearl is kind of a coin flip because I both think that they're well-made films, but I enjoy some aspects of one movie more than the other and vice versa. And right now, maybe recency bias because I just watched the X on the Blu-ray, I'm gonna have to go with X, and then Pearl by a hair, and then A Mile, and then we get MaXXXine. Alright, so that about wraps it up for the reviews and the similar recommendations. So the Beetlejuice sequel review will be out sometime this week, and I also want to do another movie roundup. So if there's any other movies you want to recommend to me, I'll watch them and review them on the channel. And yeah, that just about does it. Thank you for everybody who watched, and I'll see you at the next one.